My discontent with all of it was because of God. I just want to blame God for making me discontent with churches. That's all I could say. The closer you get to God, the more you see how things ought to be, and the more discontent you should be with the way things are. Now, we are content with the gifts that God's given us, but we should be not content with corruption and decay and pollution and the sad state of affairs.
Just distortion.
Because Paul wasn't even content with that. Paul is the great one who says we should be content. But look at all his letters. He's obviously not content with the people who are, he needs a hand over to Satan in that one passage, which is hilarious. He's constantly getting on their case that they're not growing up, that they are running off into really goofy ideas that other Jews are teaching them.
Nowadays, there's a family member of mine who would call Paul picky.
So he bashes people. He's such a negative man. But, he's trying to tell the truth. And he's like, I'm not negative because I want to be down on you guys. I wish I could just be super uplifting and super positive. But you guys are corrupt and goofy. And you have your head screwed on sideways. And God has not called you to any of this. So stop saying God called you to this. He did not call you to this. Sober up. Life is good. And you're not drinking from it.
Been married 20 years and still love talking together. This is Valentine's Day and the beginning of Lent. And I just got back from Los Angeles and I feel like, whew, a lot happening in one day. And here we are having a conversation on our couches.
I'm glad we are.
What have you been doing this week? Tell me some of the things you've been teaching the boys with the Bible.
Yeah, we've been going through the story of Cain and Abel and Seth and Seth's descendants and the ages of some of these people. And we're talking about why does Moses emphasize these particular people? And of course, they're all living to be 900 years old.
Right.
And then suddenly in the middle of it, you come across a guy and the phrase about him is a little different. It says he walked steadily with God. Like, it didn't say that about any of the others, not like that. And then suddenly he disappeared. He was only 365 years old. He was not 900.
And like
poor Methuselah, who was his son, is like, where'd that go? It doesn't say.
Methuselah was his son?
Methuselah is his son, who we know is the oldest.
Enoch? Are you talking about
Enoch was the one who God took him.
That's such a great story.
It's so good. So we talked about that and how
really neat.
It's interesting that Methuselah lived to be 969. But Noah is born, the grandson of Methuselah.
Oh, that's pretty cool to remember.
When he has his 3 kids, Ham, Shem,
Japheth. Yep.
Noah's 500. When you add it up,
wow.
Methuselah is 869 years old. Not 969 yet.
Oh, so
I'm looking at this going, we haven't read forward, I can't remember the details, even though I've read it many times. Is it going to take 100 years to do the ark? Does Methuselah die because of the flood? Tune in next time and we will find out.
Oh my gosh, what an exciting way to go through the Bible. I love that you're doing that with the boys, and I love that you're sharing this with other parents. Ooh, listen to that wind. It is a crazy windstorm. It is a true gale winds today outside.
You sound like a sailor using the word gale.
I know, I'm practicing. I'm getting ready for a boat.
I wonder if any
40 miles an hour
women named Gail think to themselves, I am a very strong breeze.
I don't think they do because it's spelled differently.
Oh, you're right.
Oh, brother. Well, this week I got back from Los Angeles, but on the flight home, I painted an idea for a new series I want to do on the flowers of Whittier.
You can paint on an airplane?
I had my little plein air painting set that I squeezed out onto my tiny tray table.
I'm sure that drew a lot of attention.
And I was in the middle seat, so I had people on the window on one side and then on the aisle, and they were like, as soon as they see me pull it out, they're like, don't bump her.
Nobody's going to the bathroom until Jonalyn's done with her picture.
And there was really bad turbulence too. But I painted a beautiful study of these camellias that I found at my old piano teacher's house. And I'm looking forward to creating a Southern California flowers card series.
Ooh.
No, wouldn't it be cool when we're in South Africa to do the flowers of South Africa as a card series?
That would be awesome. That'd be awesome to see what flowers grow in South Africa, because Southern California is a stunning flower place. As long as they have water, it is a stunning place for flowers.
And the light is different there too.
It is.
It makes it so fun to take pictures and to plan. It was a painting trip too, so it was really great.
That's special.
I loved it.
I can't wait to see how the series comes together.
Well, thank you. And if you'd like to see more of what we're doing beyond this podcast, please check out Dale's work teaching our kids the Bible, and my work and my newest paintings at my shop, jonalynfincher.com. And we'll share more about that after we have our conversation, which tonight we want to talk about
Something controversial that make everybody uncomfortable.
Always. Let's just jump in. So while I was in California, I was chatting with a friend of mine, longtime childhood friend. And she asked me about that verse. Jonalyn, what do you do about church? Do you go every week? If you don't, why not? And what do you do about that verse? Do not forsake the assembling together. Do not forsake, as she was interpreting it, regular church attendance. Mm-hmm. And, we're going to jump into this. I just want to remind our audience that we don't have notes for this. In fact, I'm not even taking notes about what we're saying, and I probably should go grab my notepad. I like to take notes as Dale's talking, because he'll do these little amazing zingers, but we don't have notes about where we're going with this. We are just sharing honestly in different ways, and we're trying to illustrate the art of the spontaneous conversation. We're going to be talking about, so, you go to church?
And that's a good question. But my thought is, was this question asked sincerely or asked in a challenging way?
It was 100% sincerely, and it was asked privately and confidentially, which is why I am not sharing this friend's name.
Yeah.
It was asked in the safety and the hope that I might have some different perspectives for her. Because she was, as I've heard, and this is not just her, there's many people, they are growing weary of the enforced requirements to show up at a place that they cannot actually either. I'm not saying this was true of her, but this is what I've heard. I can't talk with people. It's too programmed. I don't actually learn much. I'm listening to a man or a woman speak who sounds like they are talking at God or really not very interested in God and hoping God won't even. It's almost like it's a charade. Person at the front who's trying to teach me, I don't trust their walk with Jesus. I don't think they have things to teach me. And these are the ones who are in confidence, quietness of their hearts. They're just being honest. They're not saying this to be disrespectful. They're not in rebellion. They're not embittered or vengeful about the church. These are people who are honestly seeking the Lord, who love the God of Israel, follow Jesus closely.
It's almost like they're saying, surely God, there's something more to it than this. How can the God of heaven and earth be reduced down to a pop culture show?
Yes, that is what they are asking. This is a sincere question. I'm glad you asked that. It was very sincere. So how would you approach that?
I like that it's sincere because it does sound like an uneasiness. And I think that people, those who are listening to this, will often, fall in a couple of camps. One, the one camp is that they've just kind of given up on the whole thing and they're like, that's it, I'm done, whatever. And some of those, have even given up on faith or just has kind of taken a backseat approach to their life. It's like their little hobby on the side. It's a thing they believe in. Yeah, I believe in God. Yeah, I'm a Christian. It really applies when it comes to politics. But when it comes to their daily interior life, it's just like not as significant. Then there's the type of people who feel like they're stuck in these kinds of groups where they're like, I don't know where to go, but I feel like there's this mandate from the Bible that says I have to do it.
Well, that is where I think my friend and many of our friends are.
But the only options they have are these flimsy American 21st century pop culture corporations and all the things that they're designed to offer. And I think a lot of people who have tasted and seen that the Lord is good, the deeper they go, the more they see this as kind of like eating cake when you're looking for, when God has promised, a gourmet meal. I'm like, where's the gourmet meal?
Yeah.
Paul says to his, people he's writing to, he says, you guys aren't even ready for, you guys keep getting milk. You're not even ready for the strong meat, which is, you guys are like baby cows, baby sheep. You're just drinking. You can't even handle the next thing. You're just like, you're like a kitten. You're drinking now. You can't even eat the kibble, much less, take out the neighborhood bird. And so it's like, you're not even ready for it. But the assumption is that is what you ought to want. We have developed our tastes around defending and cultivating the best flavors of milk. And you see it because these same people who are enamored by these kinds of, churches, when it comes to pop culture stuff in general, they're on the same plane. It's the pop culture top artists on the radio. Mm-hmm. It's the pop culture binge watching of whatever's on Netflix and the latest thing. It's the latest, headlines in the news or the celebrity gossip. It's all flies along the same plane of like people who are merely along for the ride. Whatever. This is like truly consumer culture. Consumers are like, I'm along for the ride. What do I eat next? I'm not asking what do I create. I'm not asking how should I be disciplined or what are my, real life goals and really buckle down and try to attain them. It is, I'm along for the ride of things to satisfy my appetite today. And isn't this fun and exciting? And we live right now in a society so surrounded by pleasures that you really can live and cultivate your life around perpetual distraction. And the church service has become very much part of that. That's the second person. And I want you to be able to talk, but you asked me what I thought. I want to say there's a third person.
Well, I just don't think I would, I just want to interject. I don't think that second person is the same because I see some people who are actually wanting more and are not satisfied with it.
That's what I'm saying. They want more. That's the second person. The first person is giving up on it entirely.
Okay.
And the second person is like, I want more, but I can't find it. And the third person listening to this would be like, well, I found it. It's in my church. Why can't they find it? And they will end up becoming like, okay, I'm really glad that you found a sincere, authentic community. They do exist. They do exist. I'm glad you found somebody and groups of people who care enough about Scripture and care enough about really knowing God and practicing the virtues and character of God, that they are a cohesive group of people. That is fantastic. And if you found it in an organization, that's great. Found it in a house church, whatever it is you want to call it, that's fantastic. But don't assume everybody has found this in their communities. And I sometimes feel a sense of judgment from people that are like that. Like, well, they just need to go find some place that they do have that. They need to stop being discontent. I mean, like, yeah, but they can't find it. It's hard to find. And I will say that we've traveled the country. We've spoken in so many places. We have talked to countless people about the struggle.
Just as background, we used to run a nonprofit in which we traveled and we spoke together, and we have spoken
for 20 years.
As far south, as far west, north, south, east, west.
The four corners
Central,
of America.
Michigan, Ohio, Kansas. We have spoken all over the United States, and we have lived in all four corners of the United States for years in these different places. So we know about the different cultures, and the point is that you were trying to make. We have spoken with all these people, and what we have found is it's hard. It's very hard to find. It is hard. Sorry, I got derailed, so my thought went away. Yes, it's hard. Sorry, I'm talking over you, so it'll be hard for people to hear what you said. So yes, what did you say? No, exactly. It's hard to find these communities. And people, this is the third group, the ones who are like, why are you discontent? It is difficult. And so they feel like, okay, so either I force myself to go to a place where I'm growing more and more deeply resentful and something that's wasting my time. And where I sit is like, and also distorting the view of God for your kids. Because there is some of that
a lot of that going on, that it's like, but I need to keep going because God has told me to. And then you got the judgmental people saying, we need to find a better place. Like, well, I can't find a better place. Where do I go find a better place? It's not like, you can Google this. Where's the better place? Like, trying to find it among my coworkers, try to find it by, meeting people locally. Where is this place? I visited a bunch of different churches to find it out. It's just like, this is hard to find. So then you ask God, show me the way. Where is it? And what I hope that we could talk about in this conversation is to say there's actually perhaps a fourth way to think about this than the guy who's given up and he's half asleep now in his faith, person who's frustrated but still going to the mega churchy thing. I'm not even going to talk about the people who are content with the pop culture church.
No, because they're not going to be
different
listening
story.
to this.
And then the people who feel like they really have found it, but they kind of look down on other people who haven't found it yet. Maybe they don't look down on them, but sometimes there is this. You get it.
A little suspicion. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe you're not. Yeah. Maybe you don't have enough faith in God to give it to you. I don't know, whatever it is. Maybe they're just like, man, I really am praying for those people. They can find it too and find what I found. That's great. If that's what you're doing, then maybe keep an eye out for people who are hungering and thirsting for community. Keep an eye out for them and invite them to where you are. Don't invite them because it's like, oh, I invited you to go to my church. I hate those kind of outreach kind of things because church is not about inviting the lost. But if you find people who hunger and thirst after authentic community, then yeah, absolutely. They cross your path, say, hey, I sense you hunger and thirst after authentic community. Why don't you come check out ours for a little bit? No pressure at all. You might find something you like.
So what is the fourth way?
The fourth way is what I hope we talk about tonight. So it's this idea of like, what does Hebrews mean? Hebrews chapter 10. What does it mean? Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together. That's the King James. What does that mean?
Well,
what do people think it means? That's probably a good way to go. Unless you have some other preambles you want to give before you jump in.
I want to share what I shared with my friend.
Let's hear that.
And then you can poke holes in it if you want, or add more to it if you want.
I would love to hear what you said to your friend. I'm sure it's
I
great.
definitely want to hear the fourth thing too. So I wrote.
Well, that's what this talk is about.
Yes. The fourth thing. So when I hear that, and when my friend heard that, I think we hear, don't give up attending church services regularly. Mm-hmm. And church means the service that the 501c3 in America or whatever country you're in puts on for you to worship God once a week. Mm-hmm. I don't think everyone would say you need to be at the church every time the doors are open. I think most people are in a place of it's once a week. There's something magical about it.
Only the fundamentalist Baptists are a 3-day-a-week thing. Yeah.
Right. And I think, what I told my friend is the word assembling yourself, I thought it comes from the same word that God uses when he calls Israel, because most people say it's the called out ones. Church is the called out ones. But what I've learned is...
I'll poke a hole in that one.
What? You poke a hole
I'll
in that?
poke a hole in that one.
Okay, I'm not even going to share that. I didn't even share that with my friends, so I'm not going to share it.
Okay, good.
But if you're...
It is such a cliche, and it's so wrong.
Okay. So I said to my friend, the assembly that the people in Hebrews, meaning the Jews, heard is, don't forsake gathering with other Jews. And what makes the Jews assemble? What is unique about them?
Is what you share with your friend? Or
yes.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And let's think about how the Jews assembled. They were dispersed all over the Greek and Roman world because of after Babylon. They were thrown out and dispersed among all these, they were captured. They were the captured people, and they were taken all over the world, the known world. And when they were far away from the Holy Land, they could not celebrate all the feasts by going to Jerusalem. They could celebrate in smaller ways. They could do Passover in their homes. They could do Sabbath. But they also met regularly in their synagogue to study Torah. So when Paul goes around and meets with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles, he's not going to a church. He's going to the synagogues. He's going to wherever these Jews are gathering in the Greek-speaking world. So we know at the very minimum, when Paul says, do not forsake the assembling together, he can't mean more than the synagogue experience that these Jews were experiencing. So then I backed up with her and I said, now what did Jews do from history past that Paul is building on with this assembling? Like the Jews in the Old Testament, they didn't go to church every week. They didn't even go to synagogue. They had the feasts that they kept the Sabbath, and they honored these festivals that God gave them when he created them as the assembly of the people or the nation of Israel, when he gave them the law at Mount Sinai. And this is what it means to be the assembly of Israel, the kahal of Israel. That same word that is translated the assembly in the Mount of Sinai passage in the Old Testament is the same word that is translated kahal and later church in the New Testament. And when I told this to my friend, she was like, well, that totally makes sense. And she was kind of following through like, Paul wasn't going to churches because there weren't any churches. He was going to the synagogues. That's where he was preaching. And that makes sense in the Old Testament. And that makes sense with the assembly. And that makes sense with the law. And she said to me, well, I know it doesn't really actually matter because if it's true, it's true. But when you tell this to people, what kind of response do you get?
What kind of response do you get?
Well, when people are authentically hungry to understand, they're delighted to know that there is actually better things to want from assembling than the performance and the very short, milky snippets we get at most assemblies.
Yeah,
most churches.
That's good. So it's like you're it's like you open the wardrobe door in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and discover, yes, there actually is more. There's more. There's another country.
I'd already told her we keep Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
And after I shared about what an intense week I had because my grandma's in hospice and I had to say goodbye to her and my other grandma, and my grandpa was in the hospital, and just a very, very, very full week. She was like, man, after hearing how we celebrate Sabbath, she's like, you need a whole week of Sabbath after this week. So she was really getting the picture of how you can adapt these Jewish practices as a Gentile. Even though I told her I'm a Gentile, I don't think I need to keep any of the law as a Jew because I'm not a Jew. But I think the other problem it brings up is that a lot of people hear this and they're like, okay, well, now what? What do I do now? I mean, where is the guide? Where's the weekly traditional? How do I serve? How do I minister?
The structure's already in place and everybody has behaved and patterned their entire life and they're thinking around the structure. And
that's exactly why church continues.
It's just like in society. If you point out that there are major issues with Democrats and major issue with Republicans,
they're like, look at you the same way.
They like cross-eyed going, but who do you vote for? And be like, you better start finding a solution because you keep voting for the wrong things. And you think that the system is providing for you the answers. But if you're going to be a free citizen, you got to think outside the system that somebody else constructed for you. And I'm not even saying think outside the Constitution. I'm talking about think outside the current system. And that's the way it is with churches. That's the way it is people are with families, the way they are with work. How many people will jump from one corporate job to another corporate job? And they're like, oh, it's so hard. I feel like I'm always working for the man. It's always such a grind. I got to put in 60 hours a week and do this and that. You're like, but the health benefits are good. And I get, 2-3 weeks vacation and I got this for my kids and and they list all these benefits that they do. But they complain about, being in the system. I'm like, well, that's because you're in the system. You accepted the system. You wanted the system. You're afraid to step outside the system. You have no courage and no creativity. Now, if you want to be in the system, that's great, but don't complain about it. If you want to fix the system from within, fine. How are you going to figure out what you're going to do? But I think a lot of people are like, well, if the current system we're looking at is not actually the way it's supposed to be, what do we do now? You're like, yeah, what do you do now? You either change the system, you stop participating in the system. Those are your two choices. Or you just go along with the system. A lot of people are like that. It's like, we'll just keep going along. Let somebody else change it. I really like the singing time at church, and our kids have a lot of friends in youth group. So we just do it. We've been volunteering. We've got a great group of people. Our small group is amazing. We have all these different parties throughout the year. I just feel like I belong and I'm included. That's all I'm really after. Like, great, that's what you get to do. That's what you get to do. But the system is flawed. Nobody wants to hear it. I remember talking to people about how it may actually be true that women are human, just like men are, and not some sort of subhuman underneath men. And that, cooperation and partnership and marriage is the ideal that you're shooting for if you can ever get there.
And cooperation and mutual participation is the goal for church, just like it is in the family.
Well, I would say, if you just sort of say that on the family level, a lot of people look at you cross-eyed there too, to be like, but this is the system. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to change it? It's working for us right now, even though I'm discontent. Both of us are. But what else do you do? And it's the same thing. You got to have some courage to say, I'm going to make some changes, and I have to be willing to step out on my own and flounder and be embarrassing and have my friends talk bad about me behind my back, that I'm not doing things the way that they've always done it.
And they're not your friends.
And then I'm compromising, and they're not your friends, but they thought you were. That's why you were in that group, because you had a sense of belonging, until you upset the apple cart and discover you don't have a sense of belonging, because nobody else here wants to grow. Everybody just wants to keep voting the same thing, talk about the same thing, coast along with the same thing. So sometimes the same thing is great. If you're in a healthy situation, there's nothing wrong with changing that. That's wonderful. Hold on to the health. But that's not what we're talking about here tonight. I like what you said to your friend, yeah. First mention, and we talked about this, for those who want to look back at it, early, one of our first podcasts was, what is the church?
Yeah, I think it's like, does your church need a building? I think that was our very first. Yeah. For those of you who are just now listening to us, you're going to want to scroll way back to the beginning and take a listen to that. It's a little bit more awkward, but the content's still good.
Yeah. Yes. In all of our podcasts, we intend for them to be more or less timeless in what we talk about.
Yeah, every episode is timeless material. Did I remember correctly about the assembly being the kahal and being
of Israel.
Translated?
The kahal of Israel, Deuteronomy, you got it exactly right.
Yes, I have been working on articulating that succinctly for a decade. Yes.
You did it. You have arrived.
I did it.
The kahal of Israel is mentioned in Deuteronomy, and it's talking about when the moment that Israel leaves Egypt, they're standing at Sinai and they become a nation. It's wonderful, wonderful, beautiful. What miracles, what glories are surrounding them. God is thundering on the mountain. He's giving them the law, revealing to them what his character is like and what he expects of them, how they can have order. Anyway, I can go on and on about how gorgeous this is to become a nation, just as Abraham had promised. Now, thundering down through 400 or 500 years. It's like, finally, it's all coming true. They just toppled the greatest king on earth, the Pharaoh of Egypt, and it was just amazing. So there they are. They're the kahal of Israel. And of course, we know there's the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures is called the Septuagint, which is translated much later. And that's what the New Testament writers were relying on. That's the Septuagint Greek is what they were speaking and thinking when they were writing the New Testament.
The Septuagint Greek was what we say when we say, the King James Version or the NIV or the NASB. Yeah. The Septuagint was the Jews' NIV when Jesus was walking on earth. It was the Septuagint.
It was the Jews'
Testament.
King James Version. Yeah. Yes. It was there. It was. They spoke Hebrew, but they also had the Greek. All of the Bible from Genesis to Malachi was also translated into Greek, and that.
Well, I think there's some Jews who didn't speak Hebrew.
Yeah, you're probably right. But I mean, they just spoke. It was Israel was becoming Hellenized, which means the Greek influence was strongly there, and so in some of their cities, even like Jerusalem, was very Hellenized. A lot of Greek stuff going on, Greek speaking, and of course the Roman culture was there. So it's the Greek and the Latin and the Armenian. Yeah, that's the third language that was spoken at the time. I feel like I'm Armenian.
Aramaean?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Aramaean? You said Armenian, which is, I think,
Aramaic.
An ethnicity.
Aramaic. Yeah, there we go.
That's hard to get all those right. It's interesting because we don't talk about this as much. We used to talk about it all the time on the road, but it's been probably, a
few years
since we've talked about it.
But for those who don't know, that's what was Aramaic. That's what's being spoken in Jesus' day. Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew. And anyway, the Septuagint was there. The Septuagint, it's fascinating because it's like a decoder of how the New Testament writers saw the Old Testament. I don't like using the word Old Testament, New Testament, because it sometimes brings in a connotation that the has been and the current, and the whole thing is one big story, and the whole thing is 100% consistent. So let's not call it old. I like just to call it, the Hebrew versus the writings of Jesus' students. But anyway, Septuagint unlocks it. There they are at Deuteronomy, and the very first spot that the word ecclesia, which we now know as church, shows up is at Mount Sinai. So the church is assembled, the nation of Israel. You can't get around it. That's what it is.
So the church shows up at Mount Sinai.
That's it. The church is at Mount Sinai.
That's a great quote. I like that. I'm writing that in my notes.
And when you get to the Gospels, you see one Gospel emphasizes the word church. It's Matthew. And he only says it twice, and Jesus mentions it both. And he says, upon this rock that I am the Messiah, I will build my kahal. I build my church, my ecclesia, which is the kahal of Israel. In other words, upon the rock that I am Messiah, King of Israel, I will build Israel. That's what Jesus is saying.
But the Roman Catholic Church has taken it, and many others have taken it to mean that Jesus was speaking, foretelling the future, setting up Peter as a pope and setting up the church as the Roman Catholic, through Constantine, all these others have made. And it's not what Jesus was saying.
It's a mess. It's just a mess. It's the devils have gotten into the details and made it so confusing, but it's right there on the page.
But there are so many well-meaning people who follow the Eastern Orthodox and Catholic and all these different denominations. But the thing that breaks my heart is by gaining a stable way to hear about God and go to a regular service, they lose the role that the nation of Israel has had then and has now in bringing about God's salvation.
Yeah, so when you talk to an ancient Jew, or even even in Jesus' day, when they would ask themselves, "Have you gone to church?" It would be an absurd question, because they would be asking, "Are you the part of the kahal of Israel? Are you a citizen of God's people?"
And that's,
be like, "I'm that every day."
That is exactly what the movement about 20 years ago about don't go to church, be the church. It comes from that understanding that you aren't attending a service. Yep. You are constantly acting as the body.
So somebody, when that phrase started, that's right, when that phrase became popular, somebody is stumbling onto what the Bible is saying, but it feels so incongruent with the system that we've surrounded ourselves with and called normal.
That's true.
So it's so funny when I really wrestled with this, and coming to terms with it, people would be like, "Well, you have to have elder. What kind of church do you believe in? Is it a pastor-run church? Is it an elder-run church?" Those questions come up. And for the longest time, I was like, well, this is what seems to make sense to me based on the practical outcome of what these churches are like. Pastor-led church, sometimes has great vision, but when the pastor is corrupt or is not a good leader, everything goes awry. So the elder-led makes more sense, because at least you have a group of people trying to lead. But then you take a step back and be like, hold up. You forgot to ask the most important question. What the heck is an elder in Israel? Because this is a Jewish book from beginning to end, Genesis to Revelation. And then you discover, wait, the elders, they show, oh my goodness, they showed up. It was Moses' father-in-law that recommended elders to Moses. There's the elders, that's where they show up, and then they show up all throughout the histories and centuries of the Jews, and of course, that didn't go away when Jesus shows up.
And even before Moses, we have the elders at the gate, of whom Lot was one of them. These are the men of business, of good standing, of influence, respect, and responsibility in the town. These are not the people who happen to make the most money and attend a weekly service.
Or board of directors.
You ask to be on your board of directors to cover all of your tax-exempt status for the 250-year-old nation you're part of.
That's right. So that but if you're in the system and somebody says elder, and you look up on the stage and somebody has on the name tag elder, and he's sitting in the seats where the elders sit, you're like, oh, look, we're biblical. Look how biblical we are, because the Bible says elder here. I look up and I see an elder there on the stage, therefore we're biblical. That must mean what the Bible's referring to. And you're like, no, it's not even close. Not even in the same galaxy as what the Bible is referring to. But when you accept the system, it's a real challenge to stand up against the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church and the history of the Protestant churches and all the scholars and brilliant minds and everything going on and on and on down through the centuries. But Martin Luther did it. And he said, unless I'm convinced by reason and conscience, I can't change what I see. And the more I have studied and understood, and part of it is discontent. And people saying, here's the best argument on why we do the system the way we do. And you read it and you're like, this is not reasonable. This goes against the conscience of what I'm learning when I'm just reading the Bible. The verses you're laying out there to try to justify this are not in context. They're doing everything you can to preserve the system and to get other people into it, rather than saying, we are following after Jesus, the Messiah of God, whatever that looks like.
Wait, the Messiah of God? You mean the Messiah of Israel?
The Messiah of Israel, yes. The chosen one of God.
The King of God, the Messiah of God. Sorry, jumping.
The Messiah of doesn't mean he's over. It could also mean from.
Oh, got it. Well, I think when you begin to take language from the Jewish scriptures, aka the Old Testament, and the writers of Jesus' life, aka the New Testament, and you start just cut and pasting them and slapping them all over what we call church in America, you get really goofy things like, this is the sanctuary.
That's right. We use temple language to talk about the assembly hall.
Yeah. No, it is not. This is the altar.
Yes.
This is the elder. These are the deacons. The deacons is a little bit more similar. There's all this appropriation that reminds me of what the left has done with so many wonderful words, reappropriated, redefined them, and emptied the words of their meaning, of their cultural, historical meaning. Mm-hmm. I think it's very disrespectful, not only to the Jewish people, but to the actual Jewish scriptures we're reading. And you end up getting terribly bizarre, confusing situations like parachurch organizations, Christian universities, and colleges, and nonprofits. And you're always asking, okay, well, who's under the authority of who and under the headship of the elders? But you're a president of a Christian college, so how are you coming under the headship? Are you attending a church? And are you under the deacons?
Are your donations part of the tithe to your church? Is this
tithe?
Are you giving
10%.
To the nonprofit in addition to what you're giving over to the church? Because God forbid you take it away, because God has said.
Well, and then you get
this is a great list of things.
All these problems you end up getting when you end up taking the word church and applying it to the system of what you've always been doing for the last 300, 500, 2,000 years.
We've recontextualized the Bible.
Yes.
And we are apparently trusting the people who came before us that they contextualize it rightly, because we're not questioning it. Well, I mean, more people are now than they were 50 years ago.
But people are questioning it and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They're not interested in the Bible. They're not interested in following Jesus anymore. The first group of people I mentioned. And that's where you and I are very unusual and often find it a little bit lonely going, is to find the people who love Jesus but are also not trying to stuff you into a church system to be your friend.
Yep.
I do think people who are just listening now, just to kind of help them see that not only have we traveled widely, but we've also had quite a lot of church experience, attendance, membership, our backgrounds. Maybe just to briefly share, I was raised evangelical Quaker in Southern California. I've attended Presbyterian Church of America in the South when I went to school at UVA. I was a member of the different churches I attended. I taught Sunday school. I've taught youth group. I've been a member of the Quaker church I attended, and we were members of the EV Free Calvary Chapel Church in Laguna Beach, where you were on the...
not Calvary Chapel, but it was EV Free.
Calvary Chapel, yeah. And you were on the speaking rotation of pastors, and you spoke for the church. We attended membership classes for a non-denominational church in Colorado. You were raised Southern Baptist. very much
Went to college and a super militant, fundamentalist Baptist.
where it's no doubt that you were spiritually abused, but that did not take away your faith in the church. You and I were very faithful church attenders for a good 10 years of our marriage.
My discontent with all of it was because of God. I just want to blame God for making me discontent with churches. That's all I can say. The closer you get to God, the more you see how things ought to be, and the more discontent you should be with the way things are. Now, we are content with the gifts that God's given us, but we should be not content with corruption and decay and pollution and the sad state of affairs.
Just distortion.
Because Paul wasn't even content with that. Paul is the great one who says we should be content. But look at all his letters. He's obviously not content with the people who are, he needs a hand over to Satan in that one passage, which is hilarious. He's constantly getting on their case that they're not growing up, that they are running off into really goofy ideas that other Jews are teaching them.
Nowadays, there's a family member of mine who would call Paul picky.
He bashes people. He's such a negative man. But, he's trying to tell the truth. And he's like, I'm not negative because I want to be down on you guys. I wish I could just be super uplifting and super positive. But you guys are corrupt and goofy. And you have your head screwed on sideways. And God has not called you to any of this. So stop saying God called you to this. He did not call you to this. Sober up. Life is good. And you're not drinking from it. How dare you drag other people down? So Paul's really fired up about that stuff.
Well, I think I get very fired up about it too. I mean, we attempted to attend a Baptist church recently, and what we discovered is the amount of resources used by the wealthy men, wives, to the engine of the distorted understanding of what the assembly means. Resources, creative, vibrant people that could be used in true light shining ways beyond the boundaries of this 501c3 building on the corner of the roads. It breaks my heart, and I don't want that model lodged in my boys' minds that this is the only or the best way to serve God. And I tell you, every Sunday we have to deprogram them because they talk at church services as if this is the number one, most holy, most blessed place to be. That God is most happy with you when you're at a church service. That is very cultish.
And you hear the verses that are like, out of context, where two or more are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Like, well, how on earth are you going to get two or more gathered in his name? But you have to go to church to have two or more gathered in his name.
Well, you and I, right here, are two or more.
Hold on, I know. And then, but they're like, but then you also need an authority over you, basically establishing, yes, this is a place where we can do this. I remember hearing people say,
that too.
You can't even have a barbecue as Christians in your community without permission from the pastor doing it. It's like that's what a church community would be. I'm like, can't the church put together a barbecue? But only if the church staff are the ones sanctioning it. Otherwise, it's not a church barbecue. They're like, okay, well, let's rewind to that person who stumbled on the idea that I am to be the church, not go to church. If I am the church, why can't I have a barbecue and it be called a church barbecue? Well, of course I can. Israel would not be saying, Moses, we were going to have a little barbecue over here, but I just want to make sure that I am a Jew. It'd be so silly. It's so absurd. It's laughable, but so much time is taken to try to juggle these misconceptions. By the way, two or more gathered in his name is a reflection on Jewish law, and it has to do with holding people accountable to the law so to stop misbehaving.
It actually is a protection against things like the Me Too movement, which is one person's word against another. It's saying if there's a crime, there should be more than one witness.
That's right, exactly right.
To bring in court of law.
And coincidentally, that actually is the second place where Jesus mentions the word church, that if they don't repent, you bring them before the whole church. the whole assembly. Well, there was no church. So one of the disciples are like, what do you mean by the whole assembly? Nobody even asked that question because they know you bring it before the whole neighborhood.
That I have proof of that. I have proof of that. They actually did that. I just thought of it. Remember when Jesus is speaking and they bring the woman caught in adultery to him? They're not in the middle of a synagogue. They're not in the middle of a church service. They're just hanging out as Jews in some public place.
Yeah.
And the Jewish scribes, Sanhedrin, Pharisees, whoever, they're coming to show the people, this woman is caught in adultery. What do you think we should do? In other words, before the assembly, she hasn't repented.
Yeah.
And then she repents and Jesus says, go and sin no more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a lot to be said of it. And then, of course, if they don't repent, then Jesus says, kick them out of the assembly. But if you were to think, well, that means excommunication from the church. And that's where we get the excommunication from the church. All of it. Centuries of teaching of excommunication. But Jesus isn't saying you're excommunicating from the church. It says you're treating them like a Gentile or a tax collector, meaning you're treating them like they're not Jewish.
That's excellent.
And that is like, holy cow, why would that is way worse than being kicked out of your little nonprofit because you go down the street and join another one, whatever. But this is one in which you're like, no. If you do not want to have a part with God and the inheritance of his people, the promise is given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that you will be a great nation. Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed, and all the families of the earth will be blessed. If you don't want to be part of that, there's no point in you being a Jew. This is what we are all about 100%. And Jesus, as the king of the Jews, when he makes such a comment like this, he's making a very profound statement. You're being kicked out of the kahal. You're being kicked out of the nation. Yeah, you might be living 2 blocks over.
It's more like being an exile. It's
you're
more
an exile.
like what today means exile.
Doesn't mean you throw them out of the city. You're just like, you're not part of the community anymore. In some ways, you're dead to us. So you straighten your act out. Dead to us in the same way the Gentiles are not like part of us. The tax collectors obviously are not part of us. You're going to be over in that group unless you want to participate in the inheritance and goodness of God. Because your behavior is already said, you've excluded yourself. We're just formalizing it. So that's just interesting. That's the second place. The first place is Jesus says, I am the Messiah of the church. I'm the Messiah of the ecclesia. He'll build his nation on that because he's the king. And that's in Matthew 16 and Matthew 18, which he says, kick him out of the nation because of this behavior. So those are the two places. But let's go back to Hebrews for a moment. Hebrews 10.
Okay.
Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. It's funny that the word assembly here is only used twice in the whole scripture and only once in this context. This idea of assembling together.
Well, I thought Jesus used it twice.
Oh,
you mean
that's ecclesia. The assembly in Hebrews is not ecclesia.
Okay, where's the other place?
It's, I think, in Thessalonians. It has to do with God gathering his people together.
Oh, neat. Okay, so this is the only time it refers to actually what people think is church attendance.
Yes. And the root word is the word, believe it or not, synagogue.
You're kidding me.
No, but I would not say, oh, he means synagogue here. Go to the synagogue. It's, I think, more of a generic use of the word. It literally just means to gather or an assembling together of something, a group of people. What it doesn't say is that this is a formal group of people. It doesn't say how often the group of people meet. It doesn't say if they're under any type of authority.
Rejected all those meanings to it.
It doesn't say that you're part of a 21st century American system of nonprofits that are called churches. So when you look at that, it's really important to notice, really ask yourself all the things it does not say. So gathering together, what does it mean? And why does he say it? This is not a passage on church attendance. It's not. The emphasis of the passage
what is
has
the passage
nothing to
focusing on?
The focus of the passage is the sacrificial system of Moses, which is from God, right?
Interesting.
And he says, look, you sacrifice every year, but it's not taking care of your sin problem. Yes, it washes away sin. We know it does. God says it over and over again, all through the writings of Moses. You bring your sin, you bring the offering so that you can be forgiven of your sin. But it doesn't take care of the sin problem. So when Jesus comes on the scene, he says it's not about la 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 through life and I'll just keep doing these different sacrifice things to cover my butt.
Right.
Because we've seen that over and over again. There's consistency even in the scripture, in the history of Israel that's like that. Saul's a great example. La la la, I'm just going to sacrifice some things. I'm going to disobey God, take the spoils of war, and I sacrifice them so that I can baptize my disobedience with this thing, and then God's going to be happy with me. And that's where Samuel comes along and says, no, to obey is way better than sacrifice. And that's exactly what Hebrews is saying here. When Jesus comes along, he says, for me to do God's will is way more important than any sacrifice. That 100% is so consistent with all the writings of Moses and the prophets.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I see it.
So Jesus is offering himself as the sacrifice. And he's like, this is fulfilling and accomplishing what Jeremiah said, that basically you'll get a new heart.
Yes.
So the problem that you have with this behavior is God's going to help direct your will towards him and become a righteous person. That's what the passage is about. Doesn't mean that Moses was wrong. Heavens no. Moses is written from God. So we can't say that God is wrong. It is saying that Moses' story was not the end of the story. Heck yeah, we could totally say that. Jesus is building on Moses. Obviously, he does. He's quoting Moses all the time. He even rebukes the Pharisees to say, I'm the one following Moses and you guys are not. They're really ticked off. No. Jesus is continuing what God has set in motion with Moses. He's fulfilling the laws that were written down by Moses about sacrifices. If you get rid of Moses, you get rid of the idea of sacrifice takes away sin. Jesus comes along and says, yes, a sacrifice takes away sin, but the one that does it, that really changes the heart, is my sacrifice. So he falls right into line with Moses and says, sacrifice is what God requires, but I'm going to start transforming you from within, just as the prophet said would happen when I come. So then everybody's renewed in their hearts and their minds to choose God, not just to go through all the rituals and thinking everything's fine if I just go through the system.
So your little magic rabbit's foot. It's more than that.
And we saw that all through Jesus interacting with the Pharisees. Yeah. It was perpetually that way. And he kept saying, your hearts are far from God. Yes, your behavior might look on the outside like it's okay, but your whitewashed sepulchres and you guys are a mess. No, it's all about transformation from within. Therefore, you need to be encouraging one another to pursue this, that your wills would be following after Jesus, and you do that by getting together and encouraging each other. Don't be discouraged and separate from each other. Don't think that you can live life in isolation, away from all the other. No, you were right. I don't think people caught it, most people, but you were right. Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, is the dead giveaway who it's written to. It is to Hebrews, to Jews. It's written to Jews. So the Jews they're in this weird flux way, because there's so many of Jews in their community that all of them love Moses. All of them follow in the ways of their people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and David, and on all the law and the prophets. But some of them have encountered and understand that Jesus is a continuation of that, and the rightful king has come. The heir of the throne of David has arrived. But they're still interacting with people who don't believe that, and they're all in this community together, right? And I can imagine a lot of them struggling to be like, well, I don't want to be around the Jewish people anymore who don't believe in the Messiah. I'm very discouraged about that. They're continuing to just behave in the sacrifices. And so it's like, I'm just going to isolate myself away from all of them. I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that they're discouraged even among the people who are trying to follow after Jesus. Because there's only a few ragtag in the bunch. The Jewish communities are not overwhelmed with people who follow Messiah. But there are many of them there. So I think what the writer of Hebrews is saying, some people believe Paul wrote this, some people think other people, whoever it was, is saying, you guys need to stick together and encourage each other to follow after what is good, to encourage in good deeds, to encourage in loving one another, because these are the behaviors and character and will that Messiah has. Because when you pursue this, you're not just relying on all those sacrifices at the temple, which are no longer necessary. God is the one that's here. Now, all the people around you, some of them forsake Moses, and they're following after Moses. But you remember what happened in the days of old, says the writer. People who forsook Moses, some of them, they were killed because they went off on the wrong way, and they violated the law, and that was their punishment. How much more if you say you follow after Jesus and you violate him? He's greater than Moses. There's no other sacrifice after Jesus. There's not like a super Jesus that's going to come later and say, oh, you forsook this Jesus, just like those people forsook Moses, and now super Jesus is going to give you another chance. No, it's Jesus or nothing. He is the king. He's the one that can change your heart from within. He is the one you need to engage with and pursue. But don't abandon each other. You need each other to help do this.
That makes sense.
So when I look at that and say, if I need that, which I agree with, then I need to seek out people who are doing that. And I think that's the fourth person that we were talking about earlier. So when you're developing a network of friends that you are with and you are connected to, the people that you can have the deep, personal, real conversations with about how you're doing, where you are with God, the things you struggle with, the things you want to know, how you want to live, growing in knowledge and understanding and character and love and perseverance, and like saying, I'm discontent here and I want to be more content there, or I feel like I'm settling for the wrong things, I need some help. Those are the things that I think that this writer is talking about, so that Jesus is at the center, and he's at the center of you and your friendships. Now, some people might say, well, this also means corporate worship. I say, I don't think that's what this is talking about. That's a real struggle for me to get at, because the word doesn't mean corporate worship. Doesn't mean everybody has to get together and sing songs or anything like that. Doesn't mean they're all like praying together. There's none of that is there. It just says you are not, says some people are distancing each other from each other. I'm telling you, get together. These are the things you are to do. Find ways to grow in goodness and love.
This is in chapter 5?
10. Hebrews 10.
So
that has nothing to do with churches.
This makes so much sense to me. I want to invite people listening who would like us to speak more about what does corporate worship look like, why do we do it, where is the scriptural basis for it. If you're interested in that, please write us.
But let's find it in the passage in the Bible where it's there, rather than trying to insert it where it's not.
So excellent.
Because the emphasis of the passage has to remain on the emphasis. If somebody were to say Hebrews 10 is about assembling together, no. Hebrews 10 is about sacrifice and the changing of our hearts.
And I invite you, listeners, go open your Bibles without a commentary and just read Hebrews 9, 10, and 11.
Yep.
And you will see the way Dale reads scripture. It's very common sense. Don't need people to interpret the flow of these letters.
Right.
You can figure it out by just reading it.
On the heels of that, he's even saying, so much more. You really need to make sure you guys stick together. So much more, because the day of judgment is coming.
Yeah.
So there's this strong sense of urgency of like, this is a great thing to do, you guys. And I want you to know there's a time limit.
Well, it's very consistent with Hebrews 6, which is all about if you taste it and then you fall away. And it was a big, can you lose your salvation passage? I used to debate it in high school. But this idea that
within the system.
Yes, it does not. You don't have unlimited get out of jail free cards. So be sober about this. And the choices you make about who you spend time with, as a wonderful English teacher once said at my Christian junior high, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. That's kind of what the writer of Hebrews is getting at here. What do your friends value? Because pretty soon that's going to be what you value. And if your friends value Messiah and keeping the law and valuing God's input in your lives in this very Greek and Roman world, you're going to be able to stay faithful.
That's right.
But if your friends don't, you won't.
And that's for, yes, very much the world of milk. And the other side of it is like, you don't have to worry about, quote unquote, losing your salvation. Because the consistency throughout the whole Bible is if you want God, you get God. And if you don't want God, why are you even worried about you, quote unquote, losing your salvation? Like, you don't want God. So what are you afraid of losing? You're like, I'm afraid of losing God. Like, then why don't you follow God? Why don't you want him? So it's almost like the the person who just wants to have a little bit of, if this just happens to be true, it's like the person who's always dating somebody and then they're just like hanging on to that person while they're looking for somebody else to date. I can't let go of this other person until I find the next person, find something better. And God's not like that. He's like, I'm always the better thing. I'm always going to be the better. And so if you don't want to have to do with that, then don't stop messing around. It's a logical point. It's not like a salvation. It's just a point of logic.
We can talk more about losing your salvation if you're interested. Those of you who are, please write in. But I don't want to get too down that rabbit trail because that's a topic that's beyond.
You brought it up.
I did. And also, Dale, you brought up the point that the church is not about inviting the lost in. And I do not want to talk about that either. I just want to say, if you're interested in Dale and I's view about that, please ask for us to talk about that in a future episode. Big shout out to Carissa, Julia, and Emily for your good words recently. I want to thank you for writing us. We love getting emails from listeners. You can message us on the Facebook page, Back Porch with Dale and Jonalyn, email. And I did want to say, we're going to be starting a subscriber option so you can get some of the more meaty content where we go maybe a little deeper, a little more personal, and a little bit more controversial.
We'll announce that when we do it. It'll be on Apple. It'll be an Apple subscription.
We'll start building it up, though, so there'll be plenty in there for you. And finally, I wanted to say, Back Porch is what we do together, but we also do things separately. Dale has been working for 5 years building a program for parents to do incredibly controversial but simple things, teaching their own kids the Bible. He helps families access the Bible, and he builds confidence in moms and dads to tell the stories of Scripture instead of outsourcing it to ministries and churches. He's growing a community, and he'll coach you every step of the way. If you want to hear how he's doing it, please check him out, Dale. Well, you can just look in our show notes.
You can look in the show notes.
Find info,
Perfect.
but where would you say if they just want to click over right now?
I would say go on Instagram and type in @DaleFincher.
Perfect.
And don't forget the work that you've been doing, which people can visit your website at any time. They can subscribe to your blog at any time and see all the latest works that you've put together. Oh, did you know Jonalyn is an award-winning artist? And I'm super proud of her. And one of the great things I love about her is she doesn't just paint beautiful pictures, but she is a beautiful person. And it's not common that you can collect the artwork of someone who actually also is a beautiful person. She can do commission works for you, your loved ones, something special, an event, a home, a horse, your animals. But she could do a special commission for you, as well as picking up her paintings are wonderful to have on your. She sees things that we often miss in the ordinary world. She brings beauty to. Check it out at JonalynFincher.com.
And if you'd like to share a question or feedback, email us directly at hello@dalefincher.com. Catch you next time on The Back Porch.